Okay, the floor is open for questions. We have
So thank you all three for really a fantastic panel. And I want to commend Adam, your very Soviet presentation, and suggest that you adopt Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution as a far superior model to Stalin's socialism in a single country. That should be our model as Mamlukists, I think. But my question really is for Elias, and that is, I couldn't help but be reminded of the kind of Sufi letrists and their metaphysical approach to semantics and words and letters, and especially a text I'm working on right now, which is one of Ibn al-Arabi's treatises on khalwa, the isolated meditation in a cell, in which he categorizes different kinds of khalwa, and the most extreme form is what he calls al-khalwa al-mutlaka, this like ultimate isolated meditation, in which he says that there are certain phrases that you can recite in your dhikr that have a metaphysical, actual, like physiological effect on your body when you say these particular words. And he gives you examples of them. And the final one is a kind of string of nonsense letters almost. And he says, I haven't dared to try this one yet because I don't know what it'll do to my body. And I'm curious if any of the stuff that you have seen on Jinas approaches a metaphysical level to that extent, if that makes sense.
I have not found an explicitly like a metaphysical, like a letrist defense of Jinas, but I think that the connections between letrism and this kind of ishtiqaq thinking or etymological thinking there's a lot of room for exploration there, and it's a useful way also of thinking about the response to both of those subjects, letrism and ishtiqaq, by scholars today, because we look at letrism as like, oh, it's just silly hocus pocus, like magical thinking stuff, and until recently, with the rise of Sheikh al-Shuyukh, Melvin Kushki, letrism was not really taken seriously by very many people, but now there's a real interest in that, so the relevant question is not is letrism true? Although Matt would probably say it is. Was it taken seriously by actors at the time? And it absolutely was, by so many people. It was a vital part of their worldview. And I would say we can make a similar analytical move in the case of ishtiqaq. It's not whether or not it is an accurate representation of the structure of Arabic. It's a question of, is this how they understood the Arabic language? That's the more interesting and relevant point, I think.
Yes, I too thank you all for a fantastic panel. I had a question for Matt and a question for Elias. Matt, I wondered if you could take a step back and reflect on why was it that the maqamat were being compared to tarassul in the first place? I mean, there are all kinds of adab writing that is not put in that same category. What is it about the maqamat that places them in the kitaba orbit to begin with for these commentators? I didn't understand that. And then for Elias, I was wondering, with regard to your larger argument about exploring sort of the semantic resources of the Arabic language through Jinas, it might make, I'm thinking of some of the tarajim in Safadi's Wafi, and in some of them at least there's a little bit of an edge of chauvinism slightly towards non-Arabs. I'm thinking of one in particular where he's writing about a Berber who comes to Cairo and distinguishes himself in tafsir. And he says, one would never have thought that someone of his kind, ahad min abna jinsihi, would achieve what he did. But he did, so good for him. So I'm wondering whether in this valorization of Arabic, there's any kind of implicit comparison to other languages, other literatures that are rising on the scene or that are in the vicinity, Turkish, Persian, and because of course if he is in fact valorizing Arabic, then it might be in contrast to other options.
Yeah, so I think the question is, I mean, I think one aspect of the answer is that the maqamats had become a central aspect of education, not just for ulama, but also for kutab, and basically any educated person was in one way or another studying the maqamats. And so As-Safadi's comment that he'd never met anybody who'd done anything with tarassul or studied any iota of this field, but that he had studied the maqamat with a sheikh, written comments in its margins. I don't think this full passage is in the hand. I mean, this handout is just like a bunch of notes from lots of translations that I've. So I think that all of these people were engaged in across different disciplines, reading the maqamats in very different ways. And so I think the bureaucratic reception of it had a great impact on how people were thinking about tarassul, and I think Ibn al-Athir is one of those people who is pushing back against that phenomenon.
Yeah. Maybe I could answer that question or respond to that idea by asking a related question to Matt. Yeah, a couple years ago, I gave a talk at the School of Mamluk Studies about the relationship between the vernacular and the cosmopolitan in the Mamluk realms, and how we don't really, there isn't enough work on language politics in the Mamluk period. And with the rise of folk, what we call folk literature, but vernacular poetry, which there's an explosion of vernacular poetry at this time. And so I made an argument that I think we have to look at the parallel explosion of adab literature during the Mamluk period, at least partly as a kind of reaction, as a kind of gatekeeping and boundary formation by the udaba towards this rising tide of vernacular literature, where more and more people could become shu'ara by doing vernacular poetry, and people like, in my case, what I was arguing, the people like Ibn Mandur and Nuwairi were kind of like, hold on a second, like, let's remember who the real literateurs are here. And so the question I wanted to ask Matt was, you said, okay, in the case of Ibn al-Athir, he was, you said, here's a speculative argument, which I totally buy, that he said he wanted to distinguish himself from the people who had studied the maqamat, and he's saying, well, no, hold on a second. You can read a textbook on the maqamat, read a couple commentaries, sure, you become educated. But that's different from studying kitaba, right? And that's what separates the great scribe, or the scribes from the literate types. I wonder whether you could also make the same argument with Safadi when he talks about Hariri. And he says, no, kitaba is not about just learning all the curriculum of kitaba, which is what Ibn Athir was saying. No, it's wahi. I mean, it's something that goes beyond mere just school learning, because it seems to me that Safadi is looking around at a growing class of scribes, where there's all these people now there's a growing bureaucracy. The administration has never been as big as it is in the Mamluk period, and maybe he's also doing a kind of distancing, like, okay, there's all these great kutab around, but hold on a second. Like, there's kutab and then there's me, Safadi, right? And how is he going to theorize the difference between himself and all these kutab? Maybe, as Luke says, there's a kind of chauvinism here about, like, the only way left to do that is to say it's inspiration. You have it or you don't have it. Like, you can't learn that. You can't teach this, you know? I wonder if that is...
I mean, I think that's an excellent point. I think actually one of the things that keeps coming back to haunt this particular discussion and some of the discussions that we've had over the past few days is how you construct hierarchies and elites and differentiate between and this realm of competition. And I think that and I think it's also something that Adam was touching on is you know, you can do it through, you can try to establish grammar as the ground for that. You can try to establish, you know, Safadi says you know the balagha of somebody by whether they can do madh and them on the same thing, right? And so, like, there are all these different ways that people are trying to construct their relationship to, you know, construct themselves as, or their own group or themselves as somehow the elite or the, yeah. There was another question here. Antonella, I think, is the...
First of all, thank you for this wonderful panel. I have a couple of questions for Matthew and for Elias. So for Matthew, well, clearly your title made me think about authorship, the idea of authorship, which is tightly connected with intellectual property or creativity, if you want, even if creativity is not the right word to use in this period. So I wonder if Ibn al-Athir or Safadi use specific terms to define what an author is. I mean, musannif, mu'allif, or murattib, or what? Because your paper was mostly focused on the way to write in a proper way. I mean, the features of a good author. But what is an author still remains obscure to me in their eyes. And, I think I perhaps have a suggestion to your contrast in Tarassul and Kitaba with Maqamat, because Maqama is, well, an ill-defined genre, and as you perhaps know, it has to do also with Rasail and writing, epistolography, and so on. So perhaps this was also the perception of the Ibn al-Athir Safadi. That's why they compare Maqamat and Tarassul and Kitaba, which is very, particular way of writing. Kitaba has something to do with administration and so on. And for Elias, I'm curious to know if As-Safadi quotes Ibn Jinni in some way, or if he shows that he knows his treatise, because, the idea there, I mean, al-ishtiqaq al-akbar is used as a device, but I wonder if he had a direct familiarity with the text of Ibn Jinni, because the way of using madda wahida, well, madda is used also to indicate the root with asl, so it's not specific to Ibn Jinni. And did you compare that way of arranging the examples of Jinns, Sijn, and so on with Al-Khalil and its order in his Kitab al-Ain, because it's that way of doing is quite familiar to Arabic lexicography and grammar, if you want, linguistic tradition. So, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I have a great answer for your first question. All I would say about the relationship between the maqamat and Tarassul and Insha is, I think my point is or the thing that I would sort of emphasize is that these are the relationship between the maqamat and Insha changes over time depending on, so this idea of it as a training for Insha, or part of a training for Insha, is a particular idea that is not shared by other receptions of the maqamat. So it branches out to such an extent that it is almost as if it becomes different texts at different times and in different places. But that's not particularly.
He doesn't, as far as I can tell, he doesn't cite Ibn Jinni. So it could be that that he was drawn to the idea of the permutation approach from the lexicographical tradition, because there it is quite vibrant. Yeah, with Al-Khalil, and then for actually a few centuries, and then it resurfaces again with Al-Shidyaq and Al-Aban Astas Al-Karamali, and people become interested in it again. So. Yeah, maybe it came from the lexicographical tradition, but with the idea of madda, he's careful to distinguish madda from tarkib or asl. So the asl, tarkib, sigha, those are all fixed forms where the consonants will not change. Whereas for him, madda, like for Ibn Jinni, it is the idea that these things can move around. It's the matrix of the three consonants, and the order of them It depends on the tarkib. But that too might have come from someplace else. He doesn't use al-ishtiqaq al-akbar, but nobody does. Nobody besides Ibn Jinni does. He uses ishtiqaq, but no one really uses besides Ibn Jinni and Ibn Faris, but he doesn't use the term akbar.
I would like to come back with my question to this question, or to Matthew's answer earlier about the impact of writing, or how we can read that. Like a lot of the writings that we see in like larger frameworks, and I want to ask, like, whoever wants to answer to this, like, don't we also see like writing as Al-Musawi called it, a social, what was a social equalizer? I mean, don't we have like more people that actually, like, don't we see actually more people that use writing in order to, like, to kind of like push through these established hierarchies into the top, like through the way of writing, or at least for us they are more visible now than their contemporaries who often were the real elites?
I don't really, you have thought about that? Writing. Is it? I don't know.
I mean, I think training in writing, Tim Whitmarsh has an interesting comment on paideia, and how teaching this, which, you know, teaching adab or teaching paideia, I guess is the analogy that I would use, has both this sort of conservative aspect in that it establishes elites, and because it involves training, it can have certain kinds of reformulating those hierarchies, and can be thought of in some ways as something that enables the reformulation of hierarchies. So it has both of those aspects within it, I think.
Okay, looks like we're out of time.
I think we're done.
So, thank you, everybody.